Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cool Name RPG Design Journal. This is Mark Tassin. I'm here to walk you through the work that we've been doing over the last week on building a brand new role-playing game from the ground up, pushing our way through all the challenges that brings us along the way, and seeing what we learn in the process, and then sharing all of that with you as we go through it. So this week, let me start with my usual rundown of things. First up, of course, is the mail call from the action figure department. I give you Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. He has chosen wisely. An awesome figure from Hasbro's retro collection. Super cool. By the way, none of these are advertisements. This is just me being nerdy and showing you the cool stuff that I got recently. Also received the Swords and Wizardry complete revised set from their Kickstarter that Mythmere Games put together. Very cool, sort of old school style game. Haven't actually played it before. Excited. It's now being added to my list. If you guys remember, I shared a huge list a few weeks back of games we're working our way through. So this one here is another one to add to my list. And then also from the mail came this, My Hero Quest Rise of the Dread Moon quest pack, which is, of course, incredibly cool. It's got a bunch of minis, so what more could you want? But I've been playing through the new Hero Quest game, adventure by adventure, and I got to tell you, it is a blast. Absolutely a blast. It's not particularly difficult. It's a ton of fun. And if you've got the app, that's actually really fun because it'll actually walk you through it and sort of play that sort of game master role for you along the way. Absolutely enjoy using the app. So I certainly recommend it. I also wanted to tell you that we wrapped up our Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay adventure, which means, let me just lean over. This is this is up next. But we finished our Warhammer Fantasy Role-Playing Game adventure from Cubicle 7. There's a lot of stuff that we learned along the way in terms of how the system works. Not sure if it's quite my sort of system, but it is a pretty cool system overall. Some of the things I liked was I did like the advantage system. And the way that works is every time you successfully achieve a win an opposed roll or do a number of different actions, you get this little advantage token. Now it's a percentile system, and each advantage token adds plus 10% to your chances the next time around, which is kind of cool because you get this sort of flowing combat where as long as someone is succeeding, they maybe succeed even more as they're going along. But the second you fail a roll, the second you take damage, all your advantage tokens are gone and you're back to zero again. So you have this cool thing where all of a sudden the bad guys are doing well and it's getting better and easier for them, but then it all falls apart and then the heroes are doing better. It's kind of a cool concept. I had a lot of fun with that. I struggled a little bit with how much with the math, not because math is like particularly hard for me or anything, but you know, when you're like on the fly trying to go 53 minus 42 and you're going all these numbers in from 0 to 100 and you're adding tens to them and subtracting 10 from them and subtracting the numbers from one another and then dividing the whole thing by 10 to get your success levels. There was just a lot of moments where we sort of screeched to a halt where someone said, wait, did I do that right? And then other people are checking their math. So sort of goes to show you that you can slow down a game a little bit with too much math. But it certainly didn't take away the fun of the game. We still had a blast playing. And hello to Heath from Heath's Geekverse. Heath has an amazing channel, by the way. I hope he'll post a link to it in the comments because it's a great one to go watch. He has all sorts of cool stuff that he posts there. But now, of course, the thing you've all been waiting for, we're going to be talking about the playtest. So look, I'm going to tell you up front, this is an alpha playtest, right? Our number one goal with this playtest is we want to know if the mechanic is easy to play or if it's bumpy and slows you down as you're trying to look up your action scores, right? We want to find out how smooth it plays. We want to do this before we spend a whole ton of time building systems and tools that all connect to this core mechanic. Because right now we've got some very varied opinions from our designers, from, oh my God, this is the best thing I ever saw, to I wouldn't really want to play this, right? It's a mixed bag. So what I need to know is whether or not you guys have a good experience playing it. We've been playing with it at my house with me and some of my buddies, my gaming group. We've had good experiences so far, but it's always different when you put it into someone else's hands. So tonight, I'm going to be walking you through this first playtest document. We're going to show you what it has in it. We're going to talk through how the system works. We're going to talk through how the playtest is going to work. And then after that, I'm going to be providing this document to a bunch of our backers, the ones who are at some of our higher level backer levels. We're going to give them a first look at it because we promised them we'd let them do that, right? And then probably within the next day or two, we'll be sending it out to everyone else. We'll be posting it so that everyone can grab it. And then we're going to have you guys give it a shot and see how it works. So let's take a look here. I'm going to bring it up on the screen, and we're just going to sort of walk our way through it. So we start out by talking a little bit, first identifying the version. Now, I know this is like sort of dull, but the whole point is that when you're offering us feedback, it's going to be really important to know what version you're using so that we don't say like, really, they didn't like that? And then we realize you were using an older one we already changed or something. So that's going to be key in providing playtesting feedback. That's why we put it up front and center. We also point out that this is a very early draft of the rules, right? This is just a bare minimum that you need to start rolling dice and testing the system. We also talk a little bit about what the core rules are. So you guys probably know this, but for folks who are maybe just joining us this time around, I want to say that we used to have this idea of basic rules and advanced rules, right? The problem is that that automatically created this sense that you start with the basic rules and you advance to the advanced rules, right? Or like the advanced rules are somehow cooler or better or more skilled than the basic rules, which isn't at all what we wanted. And it's not really what our backers wanted from what all you guys told us, right? So we looked at it and we said, all right, we're not sending the right message here, because really what the basic rules are supposed to be is a core game that you can play. And the advanced rules are just ways that you can expand your game if you want to. The other thing that happened is we started realizing that some of the rules that might be bundled into advanced as these sort of optional rules modules, they might actually simplify the game rather than making it more advanced per se. And so again, the naming just wasn't working. So the new naming that we're using right now is we're using the core rules, the Cool Name RPG core rules, which represent what the game is, right? It embraces our idea that the rules have to have a short learning curve and that they're self-contained and that they have a low handling cost in terms of playing the game. So the gameplay will be fast and fun at the table. You can keep the game moving. It doesn't take very long to do things. You don't have to look up every single thing. Keeps you playing the game, right? And then we'll also be offering a set of rules modules, right? A book of modules that you can plug into the game to create the type of game experience you want. In some cases, you'll be swapping things out. In other cases, you'll be adding other things in. It'll just depend on how you want to do it, and you want to tweak the game to your style of play for you and your friends. And so that's going to be our new approach. We're doing away with the basic rules and advanced rules concept. I mainly put it here because although a lot of you guys who are watching this have probably been keeping up with what we're doing, some of you are active on the Discord. There's going to be folks who pick this up for the first time and haven't followed any of that. So I want to make sure that they understand what's going on. Okay. One of the challenges of being on a show by yourself is that when you need to grab a beverage, there's no one to fill the space. So talk amongst yourselves while I grab a quick drink of Coke here so I can keep going. Got a lot to say tonight. Okay, so let's take a look. What is a playtest? Well, there's always what is a role-playing game. We're assuming the folks who are reading this know what a role-playing game is. So we're doing away with that. In fact, this entire playtest document comes with the assumption that you've gamed before. Right? If you've never played a role-playing game before, you probably want to pick up one of the basic box sets of D&D or something to sort of get into gaming before you start trying to play this, because otherwise it's going to be a lot you don't understand. But for the folks who have played before, skipping that, instead we're putting in what is a play test. Now, I know that folks have a general idea of what a play test is. Some people absolutely know. Some people have a vague idea. So I just wanted to explain a little bit about what it is we're trying to accomplish here. And the number one thing about a play test is that we're trying to make the game better. That's our goal. We want a better game, and we want a better game by testing it out and figuring out what works, what doesn't work, what needs to be tweaked before we send it out into the wild and make it the sort of official blessed version of the game that we're releasing, right? Our release candidate. So there's a few ways that you can help us with your play testing, and I'm going to talk a little bit about those. First and foremost, just read the document. Just read it. That's it. Just read it and tell us what you think. You don't even have to roll a single die if you don't want to. Just reading it is going to be useful and powerful to us and offer us great feedback on your thoughts. Another way that you can do it is with some solo play. I've done a lot of this, right? Solo play is where you sort of set up little scenarios for yourself and sort of take your characters and roll them through and see how it turns out. See where you bump into problems, see what works well for you, right? So solo play is another way that you can do it. You can also do sort of limited group play. Like what I would encourage folks is that if you want to try to play test, but there's not really enough here to do a whole campaign. Well, you could if you're creative, and I'll talk about that. But if you want to just play test, give it 15, 20 minutes before your normal game night and roll some dice and see how it works. That would be awesome for us. That would tell us a lot. In just 15, 20 minutes, you and your friends could find out some really valuable information that you could share with the designers of Cool Name RPG. So that's what I call limited group play, where you just sort of sit there and say, hey, let's try jumping over crevasse tonight before we start our game and see what happens, right? And see what sort of things come up and sort of challenges you run into. And then the last thing here is sort of a standard group play. Now, just because these rules are limited, it doesn't mean you can't play. I mean, we've role-played Monopoly before. You can role-play anything if you put your mind to it. What's more is the rule mechanic is flexible enough that you could probably start filling in blanks yourself and do some pretty cool stuff. So those are some ways that you can do play testing. Just read it, do some solo adventuring, do some limited group play, maybe before your game on game night, or maybe even try to play an actual game with it. I'm all for hearing how that works if someone wants to try it. Next up is after you've done that play testing, how do you get that feedback to us? And that's extremely important. So there's a few different ways that you can do this. The best way to give us feedback is going to be through the surveys. And here's the reason why. We expect to be hearing a lot from folks, and we're going to be hearing more and more as time goes on. We're already seeing people starting to discover this after the fact and getting interested in it. We've got a lot of late backers joining the game, right? In fact, I should mention, thanks to a bunch of the folks who have backed recently, some of our late backers, we're actually generating more funds for art, and Russell's already working on art for the project that'll be freely distributable. You'll be able to use in your own project. So just kind of a fun aside there. But at any rate, the surveys are going to be the best way to do it because it's a controlled way for us to capture that information so we don't miss anything. Sending us emails, that sort of thing, hit me up in a DM on Facebook might work, but we might not be able to track it well. So really surveys are best. However, we also have Discord discussions, right? And so those Discord discussions are great. We do monitor those. We do our best to take part in those. But, we get pretty busy. So sometimes I'm like, oh my God, it's been like a day and a half and I haven't checked Discord. Running back over there to see what's going on. But that is a good place to talk as well. We have playtest channels that you can jump into on Discord and join the conversation. And the last part I wanted to mention about how to play test is writing great feedback. Giving us more information is better than less. Any information is good. If you just say to us, played pretty good, I liked it, that's fine. That tells us something of value. But if you say to us, well, there were 5 of us playing and we were using version 0.01 and we were doing an encounter where we were trying to climb this cliff as quickly as we could in the rain. And here's what happened. And telling us what happened. And not only telling us, and it just felt really hard to do. That's useful. But what's more useful is it felt hard because we had to keep trying to figure out what dice to roll. That sort of statement tells us even more. So that's the thing, is telling us why you felt the way you did is going to be super valuable and important. And of course, there'd be some math and things as well that you'll share us and go, this is messed up. We should do it this way, right? So again, any feedback is awesome, but those are all ways that you can help provide great feedback. One last thing about this document is that this document is made for playtesting. This is not the way the final book's going to look. All right. This isn't the way we necessarily would even write it. The point of this is to allow us to test certain mechanics. And as a result, it's built a certain way. So keep that in mind as you're reading it. We still want to hear feedback. We still want to hear if this section doesn't make sense. I don't understand it. That's useful. But remember that it won't be like this in the end. This is just purely for the purpose of testing these things out. So, all right, onward and upward, as it says here, enough talk. Let's turn the page and get on with the game. So we begin by talking about what the core mechanic is. This is the same mechanic we've talked about. I'm going to tell you guys right now, I know some people don't like this mechanic. I recognize that. I am sorry. I really am. I feel bad that some people are looking at this going like, I don't know if I like the way this is going. All I can ask is that please play test it and please tell us what you think. If you try it and you go, it's actually pretty good, that would be good to know. If you try it and you say it's got all the problems I thought it would have, that's important to know as well. Just because you don't think this is quite the way you'd want it to go, please still take the time to play test it. More than anything, we need your feedback, and it's going to be super important to hear it from you in order for us to understand. The other thing that would be valuable about you guys trying it, who maybe aren't as keen on this idea, is that you can then start looking at it and say, if I could tweak it this way, then I'd really like it. We might not be able to put that into the core rules, but we could have a rule module for you that allows you to play the style of game you want to play. So again, I recognize that this core mechanic may not be a perfect fit for everyone, but I do think it's going to be a lot of fun based on our experiments here. So what is the core mechanic? For those of you who haven't been around it before, it's a system where you just add up all the bad things on one side and all the good things on the other side, and you basically compare them to see who wins. Now, you roll dice as part of this process, but here's the deal. You've got a difficulty score. The GM says, what's the base difficulty of this task? And the base difficulty of the task represents doing the task under the optimal normal conditions for this action, right? What's the base difficulty? They set the number. Then they say, what is making this extra hard? Well, fine, you're under the normal conditions of this difficulty, but it's currently pouring rain and there's a giant windstorm blasting the place. Well, for each of those things that make the job more difficult, we add 1 to the difficulty score, which increases that difficulty score over as you go along and start adding those things in. On the other side, the player is adding up all the things working to their advantage. It starts with their attribute, benefits them. Their skills benefit them, so they add those two things together, and then anything else that gives them an advantage. And they add those things up. Now, the difficulty score is a static number typically. It's just a straight up number. It represents your target number for the test. The action score, you look at this chart here, and it shows you which dice you need to roll. So if you add up your numbers and it comes to a 10, you roll 2d6 plus d6, which is 3d6, but I'll explain in a minute why it's set up that way. You roll 2d6 plus an additional d6. Try to roll equal to or greater than the difficulty number. In our testing, this has gone very fast, right? We're really quick. You sit there, you add some things up on one side, you add them up on the other, take a look, roll the dice. Boom. Did you succeed or fail? You know right off the bat. It works pretty nicely in our experience. Very eager to see what you guys think at your table. Now, we've put examples in here. I'm not going to go through all the examples tonight, but just as you're reading through, if you're like going, what's that mean? I love examples, so there's examples all over the place. Hopefully, they're helpful to some of you as well. Now, one thing I do want to note is I'm going to zoom in here on this chart. So the way that this chart is set up is actually one where, at least at our table, we've memorized it now, because it goes D6, D8, D10, D12. And then you add a D6 and you repeat D6, D8, D10, D12. So you can see, let me see here, 6, 8, 10, 12. Then you add a D6, 6, 8, 10, 12. Then you add a D6, 6, 8, 10, 12. It just repeats over and over again. So you can use that formula in your head. And once you've got it, you can just kind of whip through it, which is kind of nice. So I'm interested to see if that works as well for all of you as it has for us. So far, it seems to work, but I want to make sure it worked for how all gamers think, or at least most of the gamers are thinking. Open-ended rolls are part of this game. Any die where you roll the max again and add that to it. So if I roll 2d6 and get a 6 and a 3, I roll another d6 for that 6 because that's the highest number possible on the dice. Roll it again, add it. I can get an even higher number. All of our math, all of our statistics, all of our odds of different things happening, all of that is based on a formula of having open-ended rolls. And we think it works pretty darn well so far from the looks of it. Okay, so now you've got those basics. Let's go into a little bit of more detail. So Figuring out a difficulty score has two pieces to it. The first thing you say is, how much training does a person need to have a decent chance of success under normal conditions? Part of the reason we did this is that and this is something we've discussed in the past, is having this idea that the human mind grasps concepts like how skilled is he or she or they, unskilled, novice, skilled, rather than what number are they. Trying to figure out what number something is isn't as natural to us. And so by saying how skilled would you have to be, it lets you look at this table and say, well, to climb that cliff, I'm going to say you'd have to be an expert because it's a really tough cliff to climb. And so that tells you that the base difficulty score is an 8. And so this is an easy way for us to quickly get these base numbers that you use in the game without having to sort of memorize a series of just numeric amounts, right? You can think of it in terms of these skills. And you'll see this system is repeated throughout the game, and we'll talk about that some more. The second thing you ask yourself, what other factors make this task more difficult than normal? And in that case, then you just look at all the things that are making it harder and you add them in. And so, it becomes a pretty simple, straightforward system where I say, well, the cliff takes an expert to climb it, and it's got ice on it from last night's freezing rain. So I'm going to add 1 for the ice and then 1 for the cold. So now we're up to a 10. It's going to be tricky, right? Again, I talk about normal conditions. One of the examples I give is surgery, right? Like maybe a surgery is only difficulty score 6 if you know how to do surgery, but it assumes you have a operating room and the right tools and maybe a nurse to help or another doctor, right? It assumes all these basic things are in place. Without those, it's going to be much harder to pull off. So again, it's that normal conditions, and then you figure out what's making normal hard. Also, just putting in here, I put in a designer sidebar. You'll see a number of these where I sort of give you insight into what we were thinking, and in part so that you can sort of help us think it through. The +1 modifiers only is part of this. I really, really would love it if we can figure out a way to keep this to +1 modifiers. Now, I realize this creates some obstacles for us. Things like, how do you differentiate between dim light and darkness? Are they both +1? Are they +1 and then +1 for another level darker? Now you're really saying +2. So why are you saying +1? I mean, you get what I'm saying. I mean, there are some complications here, and I'm hoping some of you have some cool ways that we could work through these things to make this work, right? Because I think that there's ways we can make it work. And one of the reasons why I believe it is the success of the advantage and disadvantage in the current 5th edition of Dungeons and Dragons. That system has been highly successful, and it completely fails to take into gradients of difficulty. Things are either disadvantage or advantage. Doesn't matter if you have 5 advantages and 1 disadvantage, they still equal out to 0. And that has worked fine for people. So what I'm saying to you is help us think creatively and figure out how we could make this +1 modification system work, because I think this is going to be key to making this really easy so that the GM doesn't have to try to remember, well, this one is +3, but this one's going to give a +4. I don't want to do that. I want to keep it simple. So help me out with this one, guys, when you start playing this. Now, one of the questions that's going to come up for you guys, because I know it's come up for us, which is, do we increase the base difficulty score or do I add a modifier? Which one is it? If I'm doing surgery, but I've got a really terrible operating room, is that 1 to the difficulty, or does that just mean you need to have more expertise? Which is it? I don't know. Here's the thing. Probably doesn't matter in the end. There are circumstances where it could matter, and I'll talk about that. But generally, it doesn't. Don't get hung up on it, especially during this test. Just make a call as a GM and go with it, because in the end, it's all going to work out. If it's 6 and 2 points of modifiers, or you choose base DS of 8, it's still an 8, guys. It doesn't matter which one it is. So don't get too hung up on it. Again, the whole idea is it's supposed to make it pretty simple for the GM to pick these target numbers, so you don't have to sit there while the GM tries to work out what it should be, right? Now, one of the things that I don't know where I talk about this, but for example, let's say it's cold on a cliff face. So you add 1 to the difficulty score. Well, what happens if someone's wearing cold weather gear? Does that make it easier to climb the cliff? No, it really doesn't. What it really does is it means that difficulty doesn't apply to them. The cold doesn't apply to that character, so you wouldn't add 1 to the difficulty score for them. So those are the sorts of ways that I'm trying to think about this, so that you aren't looking at 50 different ways to add or remove modifiers, right? So they're all coming from basically the same place. And you don't have to say, well, cold weather gear is +2. And because then you're like, well, when does it apply? When doesn't it? Again, allows you very quickly to sort of look at it, say, and the GM goes, and I'm going to add 1 for cold. And the player goes, I got cold weather gear. And the GM goes, then you ignore that 1 and roll, and we're good to go. All right, so onward and upward, determining your action score. So the way this is going to work is you have an attribute score, which we'll talk about attributes in a minute, a skill score, and your modifiers. You add them all together, and that's your action score. And if you want to find out what dice to roll, you just find the number here and look. Takes a couple seconds to find it. Now, for most of your abilities, you'll probably already know what those are. As you can see here, let's say I had climbing on my character sheet. It'd probably look something like this. Attribute 3, skill 3, action score 6, 2d6. Most of the time, that's what I'm rolling. I don't need to know more than that. That's perfect. If at some situation I get a +1 because maybe there's a spell on me or something, I just can go over here and go 7, d6 plus d8. Yes, I got more of a chance now. You know, it's very simple and straightforward, and most of the time you'll have it figured out in advance. Now, I'm not going to talk about this just yet, the MOs versus skills. I'll come back to that in a minute. Now, determining action score modifiers. One of the things that, again, you want to make sure is that you don't get a modifier for something that's required to do the job. So if you are doing surgery, I assume you have surgical tools. If you don't have surgical tools, that's on the negative side. The GM's already taken that into account. If you have really great surgical tools, though, well, that's going to be a benefit to you, and you can add it. If you have a friend who's especially skilled, is going to jump in to help you, that adds 1. Just like on the difficulty side, each benefit adds 1 to your score. Now, we've talked before quite a bit about things like mod hunting, right? That fear that, oh my gosh, you know, that because I've seen it happen, right? Where you like sit there going like, dude, just roll the dice. Don't try to find one more thing to give you a benefit. I do know there are going to be players like that. I'm hoping we don't have to restrict the system for the few people who do that. We will see, and you will tell me. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say once you try this out and tell me. Now let's take a look at attributes. For the purpose of the playtest, here's the attributes we're using: strength, toughness, coordination, mind, and spirit. Now, as some of you guys know, we've been breaking this out into body, mind, and spirit. There's 3 sub-attributes for each one, but we're not worrying about the mind and spirit sub-attributes for now because we don't want to overcomplicate. Really, we just want to be able to easily play out the mechanics testing. The other thing is that I'm considering this might be our core attribute base, because for most people, the game's very physical. There's climbing, jumping, leaping, sneaking, fighting, killing, not being killed, all those sorts of things, right? And so putting some emphasis on the physical may be the right way to go, but we'll talk about that more down the road. That's not a discussion for this playtest. The point for this playtest is it just gives us some attributes to start with. Now, as far as the attribute scores go, as a lot of you guys know, we've talked about trying to keep the game in sort of in the 1 to 10 range for action scores, right? That's sort of where we see the game taking place. Now, what I'm hoping to find out from all of you is whether that's enough of a scale of movement, right? But here's an example of some of the basic levels. A 1 would be children, the elderly, someone who's injured. A 2 might be the average person on the street. Then 3, you're notably better than others. People look and go like, yeah, that dude's in shape, man. 4 is that you are exceptional. People look at you and they're like going, dude, he's probably like pro level. And 5 is like the Olympic athlete, right? The best of the best. And so, again, these are human attributes. They can be varied for others. For things like size, I'm hoping we can come up with some clever ways to influence the way that size impacts things, as opposed to trying to say, well, we might have an ant with a strength. What score does it have? I'm kind of hoping we don't go down that road, because I think there's other ways we can do that. You also might have a 0 for a score. And that simply means that ability doesn't impact the game. And so if you're very small, like maybe a fairy, maybe you have a 0 strength. It just doesn't impact the game. It doesn't come into play because you're so small. It's not going to affect us. So again, we're going to have to test it out. I'm going to have to hear from you guys on this. Now, I'm not making pre-generated characters necessarily. I'm going to have a few, but I'm actually think that you guys will have fun just making your own. using a spread of numbers where you get to apply a 2, a 2, a 3, a 3, and a 4 to those 5 attributes, splitting them up any way that you like. And for example, in our example, we have a thief style character. And so Melanie has decided she's going to put a 2 for strength, 2 for toughness. 4 is going in coordination because that's going to be her aiming and her balance and all her thiefy type stuff, right? And then 3 for mind and spirit because she wants to be very aware because spirit's going to affect your awareness and your perception. Your mind is going to be your ability to be very clever and problem solving and things, right? So there's your attributes. Then we go on to talk about skills. And you'll find here we don't have anything about skills. So let me explain why. Skills is still an open question on how we're going to do it. How detailed, what skill trees are going to look like. Are we going to use skill trees? And so for the purpose of this, we really just want to get everybody rolling dice. So we're going to take a page out of the old D&D books where when you were a fighter in basic D&D, when you were a fighter in the early editions, you didn't have a set of skills. You were just a fighter. And everyone knew that if you're a fighter, there's certain things fighters can do. Like a fighter probably knows how to set up a defended camp to sleep in at night because, you know, they've been in battles and they've set up defensive camps before. A wizard probably knows about arcane materials, and if they find them, they're going to know about them. This is kind of the approach we're using. We're going to ask people to be creative and to use the simplified system. And what we're calling this is modus operandi, which the MO. Modus operandi is your means of doing things, your trademark way of doing things. And each of these MOs represent a package of skills and talents and abilities. And so rather than having a list of skills, you would have something like assassin. What does assassin mean? Well, we describe it, but it could mean things like you attack from the darkness, you're stealthy, you're good at escaping from places as well as getting into them. You know a bit about poisons, of course, right? These are the sorts of things an assassin would know. During the game, it's going to be up to you and the GM to go like, yeah, your assassin MO would absolutely come into play here. And your MO is going to have a score. And that's the score that you're going to add to your attribute when you're doing things. Again, it's hyper simplified, but again, that's just so we can get rolling dice and sort of see how the mechanic plays out. Now, in the game, when you're putting together a character to test with, you're going to either have one MO at 3 or 2 MOs with one at 2 and one at 1. That allows you to have the equivalent of like a multi-classing. The other thing that we've got is something called familiarity versus expertise, right? Familiarity is just, this is just a way for a GM to think about it, where the player goes like, well, look, my fighter, I know what we're trying to use noble etiquette, and I know I'm not a noble, I'm a fighter, but I spent a lot of time in the battlefield and most of my commanders were nobles. Maybe I picked up some etiquette along the way. The GM might go like, you can add your MO score to your attribute for this to get your action score, but I'm going to add 1 to the difficulty because it's not really your area of expertise. It's a little bit peripheral. And so it's just some guidance for the GM on when to add a difficulty score, but still let the person add their benefit because their MO still comes into play. And so that's the idea of MOs. Let me just jump down here. I'll show you a quick. And here are the examples of the ones that we've put together to start with. You can make your own. Basically, anything you can think of that is almost occupational would be the way I think about it. Could be an MO. Feel free to make up your own. If you do, we want to hear what they are. I want to hear how they worked and why you made up the ones you made. Because although I don't think this is probably how we're going to do the core rules. I think we're going to be something more skill-based. I can absolutely see this being a straight up rules module where you're like, forget skills. Let's have a package, right? I want to show you something else that we're doing here. For the play test, we don't have an equipment list yet, right? That's not where we're going. It's not what we're doing just yet. So what we're doing is if you need a piece of equipment during your play test, you say, yeah, there's a cliff. And you go like, I wonder if I have a rope. What the GM would say is like, yeah, well, go ahead. I think your MO, would normally carry a rope, and you're an assassin. Yeah, you probably will. Ropes are, and you look at the difficulty, which you'll notice is that same difficulty table, the 2, 3, 6, 8, 12, 20. You look at that, and the GM goes like, yeah, ropes are abundant. It's a difficulty of 2. You're probably going to make it. Go ahead, figure out your action score and roll. In this case, the GM might not even have you roll, right? And the GM might say like, look, your action score is 7. The base DS is 2. You absolutely have rope. And then you can get on with the game. That's the whole idea here, is we don't want to spend a lot of time trying to write up a full equipment list yet. That's not where we're at in the game, but this allows you to have the gear if you need it. So it's just kind of a fun way to do it as you're testing. So that is the general idea of the modus operandi. This is our placeholder for classes and skills for the time being, and allows you to sort of have areas of expertise so that not every character is exactly the same. It does mean that some characters will only have their attribute when determining their action score. And that's the way it goes. Sometimes it's not going to be possible for the character to pull something off. And these are early level characters that you're going to be play testing. All right, so let me go on to past the MOs here. I'm not going to go into detail on these. You guys can take a look at these when you get to them. I have a placeholder rule for combat. Now, I want to make 100% clear. This playtest is not about combat. Combat is a whole nother animal. The goal of this playtest is to know if the core mechanic is working as well as it seems like it does, okay, for a wider audience of people. And so what I've put in here is a placeholder set of rules for combat that'll allow folks who want to do some fighting to throw it in. It's very simple and straightforward. Initiative is a coordination test. So you basically you look up your coordination score on the action chart and roll those dice for initiative. High number goes first, right? For attacks, it's using the same core mechanic. Attribute plus skill gets your action score, roll those dice. Your difficulty score, the GM just simply says, how skilled is this NPC at fighting? Well, if it's a skilled character, it's, like in our example, it's a bandit. They've probably done a fair amount of fighting. We say they're skilled. It's a difficulty of 6. No problem. Roll the dice. See if you get a 6, right? 6 or greater and you hit. Modifiers, we talk about this being the same. So let's say the enemy has some sort of cover. GM says, well, 1. They got some cover. It's going to be harder to hit them now. We'll make their 6 into a 7. Good luck. And then for damage, you do damage just based on the difference between the roll and the target number. So if you beat it by 3 points of damage. Hit points, add up your scores, or the GM can, for an NPC, assign a 4 to a 10, or you add up your body scores if you're a character. That's your hit points. Again, we're not trying to fix everything or do it all right here. We're just trying to give you a placeholder so you can throw some dice, have some fun, and take your characters through their paces and see how the core mechanic works. Armor reduces damage by 1, so the GM can then decide sort of what sort of armor they want. Now, NPC attacks, we have 2 different things we'd love for folks to try. The first is a player-facing option. In a player-facing option, the GM determines the difficulty of dodging an attack from that NPC. So let's say my bandit, again, skilled at combat, they've got a 6. That's the difficulty score for the player to dodge their attack. So again, this is where the player's making the roll. So the player makes a dodge roll, calculates their action score exactly the same, and especially in the case of combat, because again, this is just a placeholder, and they roll those dice. In a GM rolls option, instead of using a difficulty score, the GM uses that difficulty score as an action score, right? So they roll dice for the guy. So if they got a 6, they look on the chart and it says 2d6. It's really pretty straightforward. They basically treat the NPC like a player at that point, and they determine their action score and roll the dice, and they treat the player like an NPC, determine the difficulty of hitting them, right? And so there's 2 different ways you can do that. I'd be curious to see how it works out for people. We also put in something here that, would love to see people play around with, which is random damage, where if you beat it by 4, you get an action score of 4 and you roll that die. Now, look, you're going to be rolling some higher damage if you do that. And so that could change the balance of your game quite a bit. But again, it's here for you. You can work your way through it. Now, the things that we're not going to go through with, because we're a little bit past our time already, and I don't want to take too much longer tonight. The things I'm not showing you yet is that we have a little just super simple. It's not, I'm not even sure you call it an adventure so much as a series of encounters to play through if you need something to start with. But hopefully the GMs will be able to come up with some really cool ideas of their own to play test with you. So as you guys sit down, have your GM come up with some stuff that you can try. And that's it, folks. That is the gist of it. That's how it's set up. I'm going to be sending that out to folks, and you're going to be able to take a look at it. And I'm really eager to have you try it out. Again, it's super simple at this point, but we just don't want to like put a whole ton of effort into additional stuff if you guys try this and go, oh my God, this doesn't work. Or, personally, I'll just share some of my concerns. Is that enough of a spread to be interesting? Or do we really need to be like 1 to 20 to make it more interesting, right? But if you make it 1 to 20, then does it become too complicated looking at the chart? That's what I need to hear from you guys, because it's really hard to tell from the inside when you're writing this stuff down and you're taking in all the feedback from everyone and making it into something that you can look at and play. It's hard to tell the answers to those questions. So I'm hoping you guys can help me out with that. In the meantime, that is it for tonight. We'll be sending this out to folks very soon. You'll be seeing it over the next few days. By Monday, everyone should be able to have access to it, my hope, and be able to start messing around with it. And then we'll have a couple of weeks to play with it and see where we end up with it at the end of that time. In the meantime, if you have any questions, pop by Discord, pop by Facebook. We're out there. We're happy to talk. And in the meantime, keep playing, keep having fun, and I will see all of you guys next week for our 20th design journal. All right. Good night, everybody.